Hello there, I'm Dr. David Clark and welcome. We're going to have some fun today. I actually get to be here in the studio, so we'll make some hand motions and keep everybody entertained. So the first thing I want to do is to welcome our international audience, so I'm going to give it a shot here. Guten Tag, buenos dias, konnichiwa, buenasera. I think that's the extent of my international languages. All right, so welcome. I want to go ahead and get right into the material. We have quite a bit of material to go through. One of the great things about video is that you can always stop, back up, and watch things again. So my goal is to get through the material, quite a bit of it. We have to paint a very broad picture to move away from GV Black dentistry. And so it's not one thing, it's a whole bunch of things all put together. So it's important in this video to get to everything. So let's go. Some of these learning objectives are, number one, we have to change the way we cut these cavity preparations. The second thing is we really need to take a look at the properties of the materials that we're using when we injection mold a class 2, moving away from some of the other ways that we put the material into the tooth. And then the next thing we need to talk about is curing lines, because once we move to bulk fill, and there are many objections to bulk fill that are really unfortunate because it leads people to too much layering, we have to understand that these curing lights need to be high quality, they need to be tested, and there are some nuances of curing lights that I think that will be very helpful for you to have the confidence to move away from layering to injection molding with bulk filling. And you know, it's interesting, a lot of the doctors that I talk to when I do lectures, when I have people raise their hand to say, who is not using bulk fill? A lot of the times the people that say, hey, I'm nervous about bulk fill, these are high quality clinicians that simply don't trust it. And we want you to feel confident that the science of bulk filling and injection molding with a monolithic material is better than layering. All right? It's not being lazy, okay? It is better than layering. So we'll go over some of those things. All right, let's get going. So I want to go ahead and thank 3M for sponsoring this, and so this is my disclosures. And so I also want to invite you to come to the Learning Center. We have 3 learning centers in Tacoma, Washington, in the United States, in Solihull, UK, and in Varberg, Sweden. And so one of the things that we do at the Learning Center is to go through a pretty strict curriculum on changing us from where we used to be, which is GV Black dentistry, where the filling goes in a boxy shape, to composite going around the tooth. And that is a massive change, and it's very helpful if you have a chance to come to the Learning Center. But there's lots of online and other opportunities to learn about the BioClear method. These are our learning centers once again, and these are some of the dental schools that we're currently working with to modernize the composite curriculum. And so dental schools tend to be all over the map, as are a lot of clinicians. There's not a lot of standardization, and there's very much a lack of consensus. So we're in a bit of a lockdown during this transition period. So I think it's a period that people will look back on and say, wow, that was a pretty wild time when we transitioned from boxy shapes and layering to injection molding with modern cavity shapes. So these are some of the faculty members of the Learning Center. I want to thank all the folks on the screen. They've been instrumental in helping to teach and form the curriculum that we currently have to make real change for our patients. And really that's what it's all about, is to create a better outcome for our patients. These are some of the visiting instructors that we have come to the Learning Center, have completed the curriculum. And so I have several objectives that we want to go over briefly here in the webinar today. Some of these have been covered in other opportunities, so take a look at those in some of the other webinars, some of which are on the 3M website. So we want to talk about depth of cure. We want to talk about the shrinkage stress, some of the sort of voodoo science that people think about shrinkage stresses. We want to talk about how we can get away from having voids in our restoration, which is a real problem with hand manipulation. We want to reduce postoperative sensitivity. It's still a problem. I have lots of doctors say that they're having problems with postoperative sensitivity. At the end of the day, the matrix and the wedge and the separator create the shape that creates the restoration. So these things matter. And so we're going to talk about the tough class 2s, not just the easy ones, but the tough class 2s that are near bone level. In the old days, I used to look at a deep class 2 in my schedule, and it would create all kinds of stress. And now when I see these deep cavities, I get excited. I can't wait to do some of these tough ones. So it's been a real game changer. We want to talk about creating compression joints. And so the thing that's interesting about dentistry is we spend a lot of time talking about chemistry when in reality we really ought to be talking about engineering. So this is two basic principles that you have to understand. Number one, we have compression joints. A compression joint is very safe, like a gold onlay. The more you bite on it, the better the gold onlay. With Roman aqueducts, where they had these stones in the arch, these were compression joints and they last for hundreds of years. Now, a tension joint, on the other hand, is high risk. When we have a tension joint, it doesn't take much to break that joint, and it requires very careful adhesion. We want to build compression joints whenever we can. Chemistry is okay, but engineering is something we can really count on. So compression joints, and that's a topic that we'll cover again and again in the curriculum with modern composite. All right, nature's mistake. Some natural teeth have a deep continuous groove in them, and these particular teeth are high risk for fractures. We don't want to make deep continuous grooves in our composite. I know we were trained in dental school to put all this deep anatomy in our materials. That's okay in gold. We do not want to put deep continuous grooves in a brittle material. A deep continuous groove in a brittle material, when you study engineering, is essentially a crack. So we don't want to put that kind of anatomy in the tooth. And when you look at the studies, there are no studies to date linking secondary and tertiary chicken scratches in a tooth to actual mastication. Mastication is a neuromuscular activity. We just need hard surfaces that bang together. So putting deep grooves in the tooth makes us feel like we're a great dentist, but it doesn't help the patient, and it certainly is poor engineering. All right, so we want to create this Venn diagram. And so what happened was when in 1890, when G.V. Black, who was a consummate scientist, he put together a Venn diagram of a perfect filling material, which was amalgam at the time. We had a wooden wedge, a Tafelmeyer, and a perfect cavity. And that cavity preparation was a mortise and tenon preparation. And today, the cavity preparation for amalgam is basically the same. It hasn't changed. In 2018, we'd like to be able to have a new Venn diagram where everything has changed. The cavity preparation, the filling material, the matrix wedge and separator. The problem is we've never moved all of the components over at the same time. And so the Venn diagram has been broken for the past 50 years in dentistry. So as we look at the transformation between the G.V. Black cavity preparation on the left, the slot preparation, which is really better and then worse than the G.V. Black prep in the middle, and then the cavity on the right is the Clark Class II or the Infinity Edge cavity preparation that requires the injection molding process to fill. You can't condense or layer composite in this, what is essentially a pouch. So one of the problems with the schools and one of the problems with people making the composite is because we as dentists can't decide what the cavity looks like. The composite should really serve the cavity preparation. And because the cavity preparation is all over the map, the composite manufacturers are struggling to keep up. So we really can't decide what it should look like. So when we look at a G.V. Black prep, and the schools, some of them still love to teach this because it teaches a certain hand skill and it looks elegant to the doctor's eyes. It's something about that preparation people love. The problem is it's not good for composite, leads to tooth fracturing. And then we sort of did a G.V. Black Light. We created a slot preparation that weakens the tooth less, but ask yourself, is this a compression joint? Is this a compression joint or is this a tension joint? So the slot preparation is a tension joint and they're a high risk for failure. So what happens is, unfortunately, a lot of doctors and dental schools go back to the G.V. Black prep because the fillings are falling out. And it's not bad adhesion, that's a tension joint, which is very high risk. So when we take a look at the Clark Class II, there's a bunch of things that we're gaining when we get away from any mechanical retention. Number one, we're maximizing the enamel bond. We'd like to see our enamel bond at 70%. When you look at the G.V. Black prep, less than 50% of the preparation is in enamel. And so we don't need mechanical retention for adhesion. It really, mechanical retention some of the time just keeps the filling from falling out when it's debonded. So one of the things that's neat about the Clark Class II is because we clean the tooth and we remove all the biofilm, our new extension for prevention means we're going beyond the old margin. The tooth is going to grow. We're going to extend the body of the filling to areas that are easy to maintain and easy to monitor for recurrent caries. All right, so here's a case that was posted on the internet. You know what's funny about this case? I'm going to bring my little wand in here. This was a slot preparation that fell out just a year later, but look at the one area where the composite is still stuck to the tooth. This is great. This is great. The one area where the composite is stuck to the tooth is what they call flashing, which we used to think was a bad thing. But it's interesting that that composite, the only composite that's still stuck to the tooth, wasn't even supposed to be there. This is in the old world of G.V. Blackwood, but margins, that's excess, it's a bad thing. It was interesting when we moved to the Infinity Edge cavity preparation, those areas are one of the great strengths of the restoration. So we're going to turn a liability, which was flashing, into an Infinity Edge. The problem with this cavity that was filled, that was an accident. He didn't mean to have the material there, and yet that's the only part of the material where it's still bonded. All right, so in enamel we trust. So when we take a look at these cavity preparations, the Clark Class II has significantly changed the enamel-dentin ratio. And a lot of us that have been doing dentistry for a while, we trust in enamel. In enamel we trust. So let's take a look at some of the studies that have been done on porcelain laminates. This is a great study that looked at a large number of porcelain laminates bonded to enamel. And not only was it bonded to large areas of enamel, but those enamel rods were bonded to at 90 degrees to the enamel rod. So we're engaging the enamel rod in a really nice direction. There are some other studies that show a great up to 95% retention rate at 10 years, which is a great survival rate. The interesting thing about the study is when you start to look at porcelain veneers that are bonded to lesser amounts of dentin, in other words, let's say 50% enamel, 50% dentin, then the failure rate goes up, the survival goes down. So people were thinking, well, if I have a little rim of enamel around the outside of the tooth, that's all I need? Nope, in enamel we trust. So we want to maximize our enamel rod integration with the Class II and at the same time engage those enamel rods at 90 degrees. And then we can have a lot more confidence that these things are not going to fall out. So a couple of things I want to talk about on this are this concept of the radius bevel. So I'll take my little wand here on the radius bevel. What is a radius bevel? So let me show you with my hands what a radius bevel is. We'll be like hand puppets here in a minute. I want to show you what the radius bevel is like. So when we have two walls that are joining each other, we put a little bevel here. That is not enough. What a radius bevel is, we're going to do a long convex bevel that's going to become tangential to the two cavity walls. So it's not just a flat or a concave, it's actually a convex junction. So if I have two walls like this, what I really want to create is a radius bevel that becomes tangential or parallel to the surfaces that I'm joining. When you look at that with engineering, you minimize any stress risers in the tooth. That also maximizes my enamel integration and creates a very gradual transition from the thin part of the composite to the thick part of the composite, which is what we want for brittle materials. So these are the assets of the Clark Class II. So we have thousands of doctors doing these. They're not falling out. I always ask people at the lectures, how many of you are doing non-retentive cavity preparations? At every lecture, the number is higher, and the doctors say they're not falling out. And so we have multiple studies that are underway, and as far as a comfort goes, we know that enamel works. And so intuitively, a lot of doctors have already made the change away from boxy preps to an enamel-driven non-parallel. So this is a great slide that really talks about C-factor, and I've got some other lectures talking about C-factor, so I don't want to spend a lot of time. But with C-factor, which is really an explanation of the problems with polymerization shrinkage, as the composite shrinks away from the cavity walls, it's always a problem. And so we've tried to mitigate the polymerization shrinkage by layering or reduce stress. Shrinkage is still a problem. But when we change the cavity preparation so that it becomes, number one, a compression joint, and number two, a very flattened preparation, the C-factor becomes favorable. So what we're going to do is instead of having opposing walls pulling away from each other, we're simply allowing the composite to shrink toward this flattened surface. So polymerization shrinkage may actually be favorable for these super low C-factor preparations. With a C-factor, it can be less than 1. There's more of the composite than the tooth. And so where the composite goes around the tooth, the C-factor changes dramatically, and all of a sudden now, we can stop worrying about polymerization, shrinkage, stress. Now, we still have deep decay some places. We still have endodontic accesses. We're going to have to mitigate polymerization, shrinkage. So we need good bulk fills to mitigate polymerization, shrinkage, stress. But the more powerful thing is change the prep. Change the prep. All right. So I hope you're having fun. We got a lot of material to power through. So grab some coffee and let's go. One of the things that's different about the Clark Class 2 is this infinity edge. And so once we allow the composite to go wherever it wants, where it's going to go anyway, we're able to get even more enamel. So instead of confining the composite to a limited area, at the Learning Center we like to call it WST, or the whole stinking tooth. We will, on a Class 2, we let the composite wrap to the line angles. Once we've done that, it's extension for prevention. It allows us to monitor those areas and get away from putting a sharp margin deep in the inner prox where it's hard to monitor and it's hard to clean that area. So we get this wrap of the tooth that's very, very favorable for cleanliness and for monitoring. Now, one of the other problems that we see, one of the other resistances that we have to bulk filling is people are afraid of depth of cure. They don't know what 5 millimeters is. And with the Filtek One, we can cure up to 5 millimeters in the interproximal. So we built this brand new go, no go probe. So basically it has a green, a yellow, and a red zone. And so what you can do with that is in the occlusal of the tooth, the green zone is okay, that's 4 millimeters. And then in the interproximal, you'll put the gauge in there, the probe in there, and as long as you're within the green and yellow zone, you don't need to layer. Now, Richard Price did some studies up at Dalhousie, and he looked at dentists, at us, about how we can measure what is 3 millimeters, what is 2 millimeters, and we were all over the map. It is extremely difficult to look into a cavity preparation and estimate the depth. And at the end of the day, if we don't trust our ability to know what 5 millimeters is, we're not going to trust bulk fill. So we built this great little probe, GoNo probe, and we'll talk at the end about where to get some of these materials. That allows us to measure definitively what 5 millimeters is and then have the confidence to go ahead and not layer when we're at 5 millimeters on the interproximal. One of the other things that's super helpful is we built the Biocure Matrix to allow buccolingual curing. The only way we can get buccolingual curing is to cure from the occlusal, the buccal, and the lingual to get 3-point curing. But if we have a metal matrix, how do you do buccolingual curing? How do you cure through a metal matrix? So the instructions are to peel the matrix away. The problem is sometimes when I peeled the metal matrix away, the composite came with the metal matrix. Or you get bleeding in there before you could light cure. So having a clear matrix and a definitive number that I know that it's 5 millimeters gives me the confidence to do these restorations and get away from layering. One of the neat things that's happened with Filtek One, now I get some of these things early. So I had the original 3M bulk fill paste, and it was great, but it was a little more translucent than we wanted, and every once in a while the patient didn't like the graininess of the restoration, but it was a reasonable compromise because we wanted to get away from layering. So this is this great new material, Filtek One. I like to call it transitional translucency. All right? So when you put the composite in the tooth, it's more translucent, which is great because that allows the light to penetrate through the material to a full 5 millimeters depth of cure, but then as it polymerizes, it gets this mismatch. So it has transitional translucency. And so when it's done light curing, it is beautiful. I know some doctors that are using Filtek One in the anterior as a bulk fill because it really, in my eyes, it's just as beautiful as regular Filtek Supreme Ultra. So I'm not recommending that you necessarily use Filtek One in the anterior, but the aesthetics, we don't have to worry about them anymore, and we don't have to compromise and stress out that the patients are going to be upset about this gray-looking tooth from the bulk fill. So that's a nice change. Now, the next thing we need to talk about is light curing. You know, I've talked to some dental schools where they refuse to move to bulk fill because they don't have powerful curing lights. So the dental school is in lockdown because they have these curing lights with a couple hundred milliwatts of output. So we need 1,000 milliwatts minimum of output. And Dr. Richard Price is a great asset. He's really looked at these things, and so he's developed a program to check these curing lights, and I think that the 3M reps will actually come to your office with this and check the light, which is a great benefit. I'd have them come in and do that. And so we've learned a lot about curing lights where some of these issues like turbo tips and some of these other things may not necessarily get us to full depth of cure. So in summary, we need to have a powerful curing light. It needs to have a parallel optics instead of one of these turbo tips, because that doesn't really help us. We want to make sure that the light is powerful, that it's been checked. It needs to be very close to the restoration. And then to get 3-point curing, we need to cure occlusally, buccally, and lingually. And if we have a translucent matrix, that's great, because we don't have to disassemble things and then hope that the composite's not being pulled by the metal matrix or being contaminated and we pull the thing apart. So just intuitively, we're going to have more confidence with clear matrix for 3-point curing. And remember, you cannot get to 5 millimeters depth of cure without 3-point curing. So that's the only way we can get to that number. All right, so there's a couple other advantages to the BioFit system, and we're doing more and more courses with 3M because it's a great synergy. And so one of the things that happens with burnishing, when you take a look at the composite on my right, it looks sort of lumpy. You can see a staining margin there. And so as the matrix was burnished to try and get a good contact, yes, they got a tight contact, but it's sort of lumpity-bumpity. And you also see that those areas where there is flashing, where the composite is either leaking, let's show you here, the composite is either leaking here or just broke off right here. So a lot of the researchers say, oh, David, the flashing is going to fall off. Well, only if it's accidental. So with the Clark Class 2, we're going to do a long radius bevel, then we sand it, we blast the tooth, and we'll show this study later. We're going to show 100 teeth at 10 years that have infinity edge margins and no mechanical retention, and they're not ditching, and it's not breaking away. So we want to expand the composite all the way to the line angle. So when you take a look at the BioFit over here, the matrix is not round. It's actually it's a tooth form, and so it has a bit of a flattened area that you get from burnishing. So what we want to do is get away from burnishing over here with a metal matrix. Burnishing, like I said, is an act of desperation. It's something that needs to go away. I always joke it's like being on drugs. Let's all get off drugs. We don't want to burnish anymore. These matrices are very stiff and they have a very broad contact. Now, to be able to do this, we're going to have to do heavy tooth separation, pre-wedging, go through this whole thing. However, when it's done, these things look like crowns. The contacts are very different than a burnished metal matrix. There's another advantage to using a Mylar over metal. When you take a look at these matrices on the left, this is Teflon coated, this is a polished stainless steel. Look at the surface that it imparts. It's a rough surface. When you look at the BioFit surface coming off of the Mylar, it has a much smoother finish automatically. It's like porcelain, and the studies will show that we have much less bifoam attraction to these surfaces that have a natural polish. So on the interproximal, we can't polish there. We'd like for that to be ultra smooth. And I do all my dentistry with a microscope, and there's a big difference between this sort of rough finish that comes from these Teflon coated or stainless steel matrices versus this beautiful smooth Mylar. They are healthier. And a smooth surface also is less prone to microfracturing and then macrofracturing. So being smooth doesn't have a downside. Now, this is interesting. We've got a traditional cavity preparation on the left that's been filled with a bulk fill, and this is year 4, and we're going to contrast that with the modern cavity preparation with a radius bevel and an infinity edge on the right, and this is at year 3, I believe. And so here we are on the left, traditional cavity preparation, burnished matrix, butt joints, they're always ditching, these things always ditched, even if you bevel them. With the compression joint and radius bevel, when you look at these teeth 5 and 10 and 15 years later, they're not ditching. Because remember, and I'm going to do my hand puppets again, okay? Is everyone ready for my hand puppets? Here we go. Compression joints also resist ditching. So when I have a tension joint, a butt joint that's either beveled or not, you get a little bit of a ditch there and then the tooth wants to break. So when we create a radius bevel or a calla lily, like we have on the tooth on the right, when you bite on this composite, because it's in compression, it doesn't deteriorate. And there's no minimum thickness as long as you're in the occlusal table. So when this composite on the right, when you look at the composite on the right, it really has almost an infinity edge at the cusp tips, and yet it doesn't deteriorate because composite has, and Filtek is up to 365 megapascals of compressive strength. So even though it's thin there, it doesn't deteriorate because it is in compression, all right? These composites in compression are game changers. And here's the other thing that an engineer taught me. If you ever could have the opportunity, hang out with engineers. An engineer said, David, you're putting the entire tooth into compression. Teeth that are in compression feel better when you bite on them. Teeth that have deep valleys, those teeth can be uncomfortable. The tooth is in tension. So not only does the restoration need to be in compression, but the entire tooth needs to be put into compression if we want to avoid fracturing. All right. So this is this smart contrast ratio. What I like to remember, I talked about it as transitional translucency. When you take a look at the older bulk fill here, it had a 43% opacification. At 51%, I know it doesn't seem like a big difference. It is quite a difference. So I am not seeing dark dentin underneath the restorations. It doesn't look gray. And everyone who knows me, I love B1. I just love B1 composite. And the new Filtek One comes in B1. So my patients are really happy with the color. I'm happy with it. It's opaque enough that I don't have to worry that any dark dentin, healthy dentin, is going to show through. And that was a real problem with the bulk fills. Man, a lot of them look gray. And if you had an old amalgam and there was dark dentin in there, you don't want to cut it out. It's healthy dentin. We had poor ability to mask that with the original bulk fill. So, man, this made my life a lot better. A lot less stress. Okay, so let's go ahead and review some of the things that we're talking about: depth of cure, shrinkage stress, voids, postoperative sensitivity. So these are some of the materials that we're going to be using in the cases that you're going to see. I'm not going to go through all of these. The Venn diagram is really pretty comprehensive. Each one of these components has changed. And if you change one of these components, you may not have success. We have doctors who come to the Learning Center and say, hey, I love this, but I want to use this other adhesive, or I want to use a sonically activated composite. It doesn't quite fit. So then we have to do a workaround. So we're pretty strict on incorporating these different parts of the Venn diagram to get a good outcome. And so injection molding is really 1, 2, 3. And this is new to some of you. So I want you to listen carefully. And the great thing about video is you can always back this thing up and listen to it again. So injection molding is 3 things. Number 1, we want to go ahead and etch, rinse, and dry. And I like to do a total etch and the single bottle, which is Scotch-Bond Universal. We need to massage the adhesive into the dentin tubules for a full 20 seconds, which seems like forever as a clinician. And so you have to massage the dentin into the dentin tubules for a full 20 seconds, air thin and cure. Now that we're careful with that and we're careful with our C factor, with our cavities, we're not having postoperative sensitivity. So we don't use Gluma or liners or any of that. I think a lot of that has come from the fact that we don't follow instructions with our adhesive. We cut bad cavity preparations and then we sort of put a Band-Aid on it with Gluma and liners. We don't use those at the Learning Center. We're having great results with just Scotch-Bond Universal and proper engineering and then following the instructions. All right, so we massage the adhesive into the dentin tubules for a full 20 seconds, air thin and cure. And then the next thing is we inject the flowable composite. And we don't light cure the flowable composite. And this is Filtek Bulk Fill Flowable. We line all the marginal areas. We inject it into the infinity edge. We don't cure the flowable, and then we go in directly with the regular Filtek One or the paste composite and push it in. It says this is a replacement for the old snowplow technique because we're injecting it instead of sort of patty caking it. And then our goal is to have about 90% of the restoration to actually be in the Filtek One. This is going to displace most of the flowable. And so it's a lot like taking a light body and heavy body impression. We need the light body material to be able to fit to all the nooks and crannies, and then we need the heavier material for strength and aesthetics. And we get what we want by using these, a lot like taking a light body and heavy body impression. So once again, we massage adhesive into the dentin tubules for 20 seconds, air thin and cure. and then we inject the flowable composite. We don't cure that. And then we inject the regular paste composite, or the Filtek 1, into the bulk fill flowable, displacing it laterally. I'll show you a movie in a minute of how this works. And then we get our monolithic result. So this is a great case. It's done by Dr. Richard Young. He's kind of a wild guy down in San Bernardino. If you ever get a chance, see Richard's lectures. He's great. And so he has got this case partially assembled. He's got the BioFit matrix in place with the proper cavity preparation, the wedges in place. The diamond wedges are unique. One of the things that we did with the diamond wedges is the diamond wedge allows for an infinity edge, and when you go from small to large, the wedges are all the same height. One of the things that drove me crazy was with wedges, when they got bigger, they got taller. Who wants a tall wedge? Because now you're going to have a point contact. So we're grinding the wedges down. So these wedges are all the same height, all the way from small to large. And then I want to show you this little green guy here. This is called the Furkel. There's a little hump on there. We got a patent on that. This little furcation goes into when you have deep caries and a fluting, or on the mesial of a first bicuspid, you have that little fluting that always gets an overhang. And for my German friends, just so you know, I've learned this. In German, an overhang is an Überhang. I thought you would need to know that. Anyway, it avoids the Überhang if you're in Germany, or the overhang. And so the last thing we do to get the Rockstar polish in the areas where the matrix doesn't touch is, after we use a Softflex XT disc to get the general shape, we go in with the Magic Mix in a disposable Profi cup, and then we finish it with the Jazz Polisher. This is diamond impregnated cup. So that's how we're able to achieve this two-step Rockstar polish. All right, so let's go through a bunch of cases, and we'll go through these pretty quickly. There's a lot of slides on here. I just want to show you the steps on this. We like to call this deep margin acquisition. That's the new term for whenever we have deep decay. We have to get access to this deep decay. The number one problem with these deep class 2 cases is we're not getting down to where the decay is. We're fighting the soft tissue. And John Stropko, a great endodontist, taught me something. He says, David, don't fight the case. David, don't fight the case. I think we fight the case a lot with a class 2. So we have to have, like with microendodontics, you have to have a good flap. The same thing here. We have to get access to these cases. We're not taking class 2s. I didn't take class 2s seriously enough. And now it's my favorite procedure. It's one of the most important things we do, and it's one of the most difficult things that we do. So let's take it seriously. So deep decay, deep margin acquisition, here we go. Now, this is the sequence that we're going to use. So a couple of things you need to understand here is, number one, we pre-wedge. We always put a wedge in before we do the restoration. It gives us several benefits. We've talked about these in some of my other videos. We always pre-wedge. It's step one to getting a great contact. Now, we'll go through these other steps here as we do the case. So here's a deep caries case before and after. And you know, these new digital x-rays, I've talked to lots of clinicians about this. Sometimes when the decay gets deep, you kind of lose the clarity. So this is a lot deeper than it looks. And so once we get into this case, this decay is basically about 1 millimeter from bone level. So there's the pre and post-operative radiographs of the case with the compression joint, no mechanical retention. So let's talk about how we got this result. So first thing we're going to do is we always disclose and blast, and then we do selective caries removal. We want to get a clean periphery, but in the deep areas, we'll leave caries over the pulp horn, and that has up to a 95% success rate. Then we'll go ahead and do the composite overlay, and then we always create 2 millimeters of cuspal clearance if we have to cover a cusp. In this case, I'm going to cover the mesial distal half of both the buccal and lingual cusps. So once we remove a cusp, I need 2 millimeters of clearance. So here we are. This is the pre-wedge, and you can see that the tooth is sort of carved up here, and but the pre-wedge is still helping me. Now, because I was able to maintain the line angles, I ended up having a much easier time on this case. The next case, I won't have my line angle. So I got a nice line angle I maintained here and here, and then I put a radius bevel on that. But those are super helpful. Do not knock them away. One of the tragedies of a GV Black prep, think about this. If I had to cut a retentive cavity here, I'd have to chop all this enamel away. And now the contact is going to be miserable. Because my line angles are maintained with these modern cavity preparations, or what my partner Dr. Kim likes to call the pumpkin shell caries, I'm able to leverage that enamel, put a radius bevel on it, and that line angle here and that line angle here are going to keep my wedge apical. I'm not going to fight the wedge so much. So keep those shoulders. Keep those shoulders on your cavity preparations. So let's spin this thing around and take a look. And there's the selective caries retention. I'll back up once here. Here's the selective caries retention. This is not pulp. That's caries indicator. I've got 2 millimeters of clean tooth structure. And so we're also going to do what's called opportunistic access. We teach this at the Learning Center. We're going to come in from the side on this case that was slightly cavitated. We always fill the small cavity first. I'll use one of the original Biochrome matrices here that are quite flat and clear. We just use the Filtek Bulk Fill Flowable here in this area. Cure that. There's no need to put the regular composite here because it's not under load. And then we injection overmold the next tooth. So there's the opportunistic access that we fill first. We always fill the small cavity first. So there we are with the pre-wedge, giving several different angles. You can see that I'm overlaying the distal half of the buccal cusp and the distal half of the lingual cusp. We're not going to do any mechanical retention in any of our composites that we do. We have to create compression joints. And so we're going to basically overlay this tooth, and this is the clearance requirement when I remove half of a cusp, the distal half of the cusp. So we've got 2 millimeters of net clearance in this area. All right. There's some things that are missing here. I'm going to pack cord, number 3 cord to the line angles. Then we remove the cord. Then we repeat that. You'll see that in the video that's coming up. And so, here we are. Let's go ahead and play the video. This is a Dentiform video, so you have to kind of pretend that we're working on an actual tooth. So this is a cuspal overlay case, and I'm putting the matrix on the tooth, and you're going to notice that the matrix is fighting the rubber gums of the Dentiform. And so when you see this, the first thing I'll do is I'll say, I need to go into deep margin acquisition. I need to get access to the deep margin. So I'm going to take some 3 cord that's been soaked in Astringent or Hemident, and then I'm going to go ahead and take this, and I'll use this instrument that comes in the BioClear kit and pack that cord to the line angles, not just in the cavity. This cord needs to go all the way to the line angles, and you are going to lean on this cord. Hey, we do this anytime we have a deep crown margin. And then I'm going to take this out. And there's something magical that happens when you do it a second time. So I'll go ahead, take the same piece of cord, I'll soak it, put it back in there. The second time the cord goes in, I'm able to pack that cord, if necessary, all the way to bone level. And the one thing that helps us out in these deep margin acquisition cases is that the caries is never subosseous. We've always got 1 millimeter of tooth typically above the bone. We take the cord out, we're going to have no bleeding, and the matrix should slide all the way to bone level. Now, one thing that I'm going to do here, I'm going to pause the video here because there's an important point here that you're going to need to know. Very often, you're going to need to go in at the corners of the matrix and trim off on the gingival the corner right here, because sometimes it'll fight you. So that's the one thing that we have to do, or you can be more aggressive with your cord packing. So take the corners of your matrix and trim those off, bevel those back so that you have an apron on the interproximal if it doesn't seat fully. Other than that, this video is current. So always hold the tab of the BioFit matrix down heavily with your finger. If you don't hold the tab down, the matrix will move up or move buccally during insertion. So now the matrix has a great seal. This is the Furcal wedge that's closing that furcation. And so then the twin ring separator goes on, which gives you about 5 pounds of tooth separation. The wedge gives you about 1 pound or 2 of tooth separation. We're going to have a great contact. There's no need to burnish. We pre-wedge, so that gives us a tighter contact. But the problem is, in these deep cases, the matrix does not want to stay over. So now we're going to do what's called the spot weld technique, or the push-pull technique. So we're going to go ahead and etch, rinse, and dry, which I'm not going to do on the video because it's a plastic Dentiform tooth. But we would etch, rinse, and dry, and we're not going to worry about that gap right there, and we're not going to burnish, because burnishing, we're done with that. So I'm pretending to etch, rinse, and dry the tooth, and then we would massage the adhesive into the dent tubules for a full 20 seconds, and then we air thin and cure. And then we're going to do the spot weld technique. So we're going to go ahead and create a tripodized purchase on the matrix. Just put a little spot of flowable, or if you have to do, if you're deeper than 5 millimeters, you could go ahead and do a 1 millimeter gingival increment for depth of cure. And then you're going to take the bulk fill flowable and put it on the outside, over, and then inside the matrix. So the flowable composite goes inside the matrix and then over the top and outside. It's going to lock the matrix in position. I think I missed that one. So those of you watching, yeah, I kind of missed that one on the side. The composite has to go outside the matrix too. You're going to pull this over, and we actually have a brand new instrument for this that I don't have for the video, called the push-pull instrument. You pull the matrix or push it over with a couple of pounds of pressure, and now you have a perfect form for injection molding. It's a great big broad contact. It's not all burnished and lumpity-bumpity. Injection molding is all front-loaded. It's just like pouring concrete. If the form is great, you're going to have a great composite. In the old days, with composite, we would sort of hurry and get the composite into the tooth and then spend a long time trying to fix it up. So now it's just the reverse. We want to have everything front-loaded, build this incredible form to injection mold, have it clear, anatomically shaped, injection mold a monolithic mass. It's a lot of fun. It's taken 25 years of my career to be able to do a beautiful class 2 like this, and now I love doing these things. I used to hate them, frankly. And so that is the deep margin acquisition video. Here's the case to completion. Now that we did the deep margin acquisition, I didn't show the cord on this. The matrix and wedge are sliding nicely. As we go to higher magnification, you can see that we have great adaptation. I'll back that up there. You can see that I have a nice seal on the gingival. And then we've got the intentional excess in the injection zone. We do not want to remove that. There's value to that. It helps the composite shrink toward the margins, and whenever we disturb the composite during polymerization, it ruins the composite. So you do not want to remove that excess. Just simply pile it up, put a nice groove in there, and then cure it. Once we're done, we'll relight cure that. There's the final result. We don't put any deep anatomy in these teeth because it does not help the patient. It does predispose the tooth to fracturing. There's another oblique view. The marginal ridges need to be beautifully rounded because that area needs to be in compression. A little point contact is in tension. Those tend to break. So we've got a nice rounded marginal ridge. And that's going to give us something that we can chew on, hopefully, for the next 20 or 30 years. These composites need to last for 20 or 30 years, not 2 or 3 years. We've got to do as well with these as we did with gold. So here's the next case. This case is a little bit different. This is one that, you've got to go into these cases with a battle plan instead of just sort of stumbling into the case without thinking. It's really like setting up an implant case. Every case has its own challenges. So in this particular case, I really tried to go in with a little bit more thought. So we're going to be going ahead and showing a different case. Here's the preoperative and postoperative. This is a case a lot like the last one that we did. We've got this pumpkin shell caries going on. We know that cavity progression has changed in the era since GV Black. We've got fluoride that has changed it, and so the outside of the tooth is intact and the inside is very badly decayed. There's the two-tone disclosing solution, and so it's critical that we do that. And this is really interesting. I actually went in and put acid etch on that spot right there and waited for 20 seconds. You can see that phosphoric acid does not remove biofilm. Let me repeat, phosphoric acid does not remove biofilm. So if we're going to have an infinity edge, we have to go in, disclose so we can see what we're doing, and then blast this. This is a BioClear blaster with aluminum trihydroxide. We feel that the number one reason that composites are staining is because in the area that's the infinity edge, or what other people call flashing, you cannot remove biofilm with phosphoric acid. And so the composite never bonds, turns brown right away. So anyway, we did the blasting. This is a fissurotomy burr by SS White. We're going to create a bit of a radius cut here, try to create a compression joint. I'm leaning the burr laterally to create a better stress mitigation. This is the NTF fissurotomy burr to get rid of those last little remnants of stain. And then we're going to go ahead and once that's done, go into the caries area. Now, one of the ways that we keep from gouging the neighboring tooth is we stay inside the tooth. In the old days, we would try and break that cavity wall with a 56 burr, which is incredibly dangerous and so difficult to do. You're going to stay inside the cavity preparation with that round-ended diamond. And then what we're going to do is once the DEJ caries is removed, we're going to go ahead and create a radius bevel. And once again, we're going to basically overlay the distal half of both the buccal and lingual cusps. So I started with a coarse diamond burr, and now I'm moving to the fine diamond burr, and you've got a burr list on here. And the next thing that's super critical is to take these lightning strips and cup them under the emergence profile, because the biofit matrix is going to go 1 or 2 millimeters past where we used to put the margin. And that's a benefit if it's clean. So we have to sand it aggressively. There's the biofit bicuspid matrix. Remember, push the matrix very aggressively. You can't smash this HD matrix. Now, in this particular case, the matrix looks like it's going to be a problem, but once I get the separator on here and I walk the matrix over, I'm going to expand and appose the matrix. It's laying so beautifully against the neighboring contact, and I think it's because my line angles were maintained. I don't have to do that spot weld technique. We can go right to injection molding. So I like putting a little bit of the liquid etch down first just to make sure I get good wetting of the enamel. And basically, we filled the tooth up to where the matrix was going to hit it. There's the acid etch, 20 seconds, rinse and dry. And then we're going to go ahead and massage the Scotch-Bond Universal into the dent tubules for a full 20 seconds. Now this little pink area that you see, that's caries indicator. That is not pulp, okay? That's not a pulpal exposure. The pulp is at least 2 millimeters away. And caries indicator is not 100%, but we like to use it for demonstration purposes. So we're going to go ahead and cure the composite, and then we move to injection molding. Once again, it's the second step of injection molding. We're going to inject this, but not light cure. Make sure and inject slowly. You're actually going to see me injecting at 90 degrees to the tooth restoration interface. Watch this. I'm going to lift the matrix off the tooth. Richard Young caught this. This is great. I'm going to lift the matrix off the tooth to make sure that my flowable composite goes to the infinity edge. Then I'll come along the lingual and do the same thing, injecting slowly to let the composite go to the infinity edge. We're not going to light cure this. This kiss was only 5 millimeters deep, and so we were able to do this without doing a gingival increment. And then the next thing I'm going to do is inject the Filtek 1 paste material into the flowable composite. And you need to inject feeling back pressure, taking advantage of the thixotropic nature of composites, feeling the back pressure, sort of riding this hovercraft of back pressure. And then once you see the flowable composite has been pushed out the path of least resistance buccolingually, we'll create some gentle anatomy, a central groove that helps for light curing and also to mitigate some cross-tooth polymerization shrinkage stress. Try saying that 10 times quickly. And then we'll go ahead and do a quick light cure. We'll take the separator off, and then we're going to do 3-point curing. You can't really do 3-point curing until the separator comes off. So we'll pull the separator off, and now I have proximity, and we will do 3-point curing. And so I'll do buccal and lingually at the same time. This is a special Clark Explorer. It's real helpful if you have a very stiff Explorer to remove the matrix. Then we'll spin this out with the hemostat. And then we'll go into the sculpting. And so when we do these fairly large areas of intentional excess in the injection zone, I think the first time a doctor sees these, they panic. And then you get very good at amputating and sculpting that. And we can take a tooth like this and amputate the excess, sculpt it with the Softflex XT disc, which is one of Dr. Kim has really taught us how to use this disc beautifully. We marry the infinity edge here. We never want to use burrs for that. You can use a little Bart Parker if you have any areas that you want to sculpt on the gingival. And then we'll go into the magic mix, which is next in a disposable cup. You'll see that here in just a minute. We're going to go ahead and take floss with the contact, and on the mesial, we're actually going to use this little true contact saw because I was not restoring the mesial and there was a little bit of material there, so I broke that. Checking the contact, nice, snug, broad contact occlusal gingivally. This is the Softflex strip. We do take these across the gingival margin. Now, some of you are worrying that we're going to mar the finish there, but you really get a great polish with that, and we want to make sure that we don't have any excess. All right, so here's the magic mix that I was talking about. We're going to put that in a disposable cup. It has two different sizes of abrasive. It's got big chunks of aluminum oxide and then little fine aluminum oxide. So once you're done with this, it gets a great matte finish. And then we're going to use a diamond impregnated cup. These are reusable. You want to make sure that your assistant doesn't throw these things away because they're $10, $15. But you should be able to get 5 or 10 uses out of those. So there we go. There's the cuspal overlay, infinity edge. And so this is a compression joint. This tooth was in trouble. So I'm going to show a case like this that's 18 years old with a compression joint, deep caries on here. And here we are 18 years later. The tooth is very comfortable. I'm not worried about fracturing. We have beautiful infinity edges. And we're currently doing a study showing 100 of these teeth at 10 years that this works. And the Venn diagram has moved. And we didn't start doing this yesterday. We've been doing this a long time. And we have thousands of doctors doing it like I talked about. So now we have not only dental schools, but dentists in private practice. We're going to go ahead and go into these last cases. And so I want to talk about Arturo. He came to my practice. He was a toothache emergency. And it's interesting with Arturo. He came in, and I was interviewing him very carefully because I didn't want to bias myself. You look at this case and you say, hey, that's some real deep decay. He must have pulpitis. But I talked to him carefully, and I do speak a little Spanish, so I interviewed him in Spanish. And he really talked about the fact that the pain was only present when he got food impacted in this area. So he's got a broken enamel, he's getting food impacted in there. He did not have pulpitis. He did not have a pulpitis. His pain was from food impaction. These contacts really matter. They create either a lot of health or a lot of lack of health. So we went ahead, and because the pain was linked to food impaction, not irreversible pulpitis, we did the same thing. But his case is different. His case is interesting. I want you to look. He's periodontally involved. So I'm not going to be really fighting to get access to the gingival margin as much as fighting to get all the calculus out of there and just clean this area up. But because because the tooth is periodontally involved, we're going to have to use a different wedging strategy. So here's preoperative and here's postoperative. I'm still 4 or 5 millimeters from the bone. So I had different challenges with Arturo, but now that I'm thinking about the cases in advance, I was ready, I wasn't frustrated. All right. So let's go ahead and go through the case with Arturo. You're going to notice something here. We're doing wedge stacking. This is the opposite of a case where we're near the bone. In this particular case, the diamond wedge did not seal the gingival margin the first time because I didn't have enough lateral pressure. And that was because there was such a pocket in the area. So in these cases, in periodontally involved teeth or in older patients, you're going to want to nest these wedges. This is wedge nesting. Not nedge westing, wedge nesting. We're going to put the small wedge underneath the larger wedge. And we always put the small wedge underneath just to lift the wedge up. And when I lifted the wedge up, now the gingival margin was sealed beautifully. But until I did that, it didn't work. So number one, always pre-wedge. Number two, you want to nest these wedges when we have this vertical defect like this. The bottom wedge is going to be the smaller, the pink wedge. And then the furcal wedge has to be directed toward the furcation. The larger wedge goes on top, or occlusally. So there's a high magnification view. We've got a beautiful sealed margin, compression joint, selective caries removal. All the pieces are coming together beautifully. The matrix is behaving itself. I did not have to do the push-pull technique here. The matrix, once I walked it over, it was in a beautiful position. And so here we are. Here's a lateral view of the assembly. Here's the immediate postoperative. We've got a beautiful broad contact, especially in a case like Arturo's. You really have to worry about getting food impaction again. If he gets food impaction again, he's just going to have periodontal disease. The contact's going to open up. He's going to get caries again. And so we need a very broad contact from buccal to lingual, beautiful rolled marginal ridge for a compression joint. And he immediately, this resolved his pain. He's happy. And now I made a friend. He's coming back for regular treatment because I was able to hit a home run for him. I was able to really do him a service, a single appointment. He was a bit of a flight risk. I wasn't sure he was going to come back in for his appointment. So I really wanted to take care of him that day. And so I just put a little bit of coating in here. This is the modified Hall technique. All right, so once again, for deep margin acquisition, we pre-wedge most of the time. We don't remove the papilla. We take the cord in and out twice. Then the matrix should slide all the way to bone level if needed. Once you've done this, wedge use is optional. If you have a deep margin acquisition case and there's just nothing to hold the wedge and the wedge is smashing the matrix, you don't need a wedge anymore because the separator provides more tooth separation. The separator provides more tooth separation than the wedge. So you don't have to use a wedge. You just need to make sure that the matrix is laying nicely against the tooth. And once you create that little trench for deep margin acquisition, 90% of the time, it's a perfect seal. Put the bolt fill flowable down, cure it. Now we're not going to worry about having a bunch of extrusion. Then we injection mold. So the last case is by Dr. Kim. This is a case that I referred to her. She did the endodontics and the deep margin acquisition. Look at this beautiful case. This is a case where if you put a crown on this tooth, this is a high risk for snap-off failure. So Dr. Kim did all kinds of great things here. She did an opportunistic endodontic access. She came through the distal. She did part of the composite first, then finished the composite when she was done. She's got a beautiful tooth restoration interface, cuspal overlay. She maintained this little strut of tooth structure right here, which is so valuable. By angling her endodontic axis, John Cotomy taught us this, opportunistic axis coming from the distal. It's a little inconvenient, super conservative endo. We're not going to put a crown on this tooth. Putting a post in this tooth will not benefit us. We need to eliminate the fracturing potential with the preliminary strike point by creating a compression joint, which Dr. Kim has done nicely here. This tooth may not last forever, but the restorative in this case was far more important than the endodontics, and they really need to be done together. And that's great for you doctors doing endodontics to think of your restorative as sometimes a lot more difficult and more important than the endo in a case like this, because in reality, if the restorative on this tooth fails, the tooth is gone. We're not going to be able to maintain the tooth. So we've really got to be able to do both of those things together and think of endo and the restorative as one procedure, which Dr. Kim did a great job on this one. There's one last deep margin acquisition case. I hope you're hanging in there. This is the stuff that a lot of us see every day. So here's a case with what we like to call nature's mistake. Here's a patient. Oh, let me back up here. This is a great case. Dr. Alex Falk at University of Minnesota did a finite element analysis of a tooth under tension. So here, let me set the case up. So what he did was, this is finite element analysis, computer analysis or simulation of what's going to happen when you load a tooth. What we have here is a composite restoration in a GV black sort of framework. We're going to load this tooth up and we're going to watch the stress distribution and the stresses build up. We're going to go from green to yellow to red. So these are the areas where the stresses are building up, and this is what happens in a brittle material. And then these areas are the areas where we get crack initiation. And so let's go ahead and roll the tape. So as we're putting pressure on those cusps, you're seeing a lot of stress build up here at the central groove. That's why we don't want to put deep grooves in the composite. And then right here, we see, I'm going to roll this again. I'm having so much fun. Let's watch the video again. When we load this again, I want you to watch the stresses building up here and here. This is why composite does not strengthen the tooth when we do these old-fashioned cavity preparations. And beveling it and adhesion doesn't help. It's basically just like an amalgam. When we cut a GV black prep and put composite in it, we might as well use amalgam because the outcome studies will show you that the tooth breaks just the same. This is an engineering problem. So with a calla lily preparation overlays, we create compression joints. But let's take a look at this tension joint one more time. Watch the stresses build up in the central groove, watch them build up at the tooth restoration interface, and then bang. How many times have you seen this in your career? How many of you have had this happen in your own mouth? I mean, we're all good dentists. We're trying to do a good job, but we're using outdated engineering and a cavity preparation from 1890. And people hang on to that cavity preparation like a little baby heads onto a blanket. It's time to let the blanket go. We've got to modernize these cavity preparations. So here's a patient with nature's mistake. This is a patient, she was 60 years old, and she's got this deep palatal anatomy here, and we're going to show this in just a minute. So the disclosing solution that we talked about before is also great for crack identification. Why? Because the cracks are full of biofilm. So we're going to go ahead and put this dual color disclosing solution in here. It helps us to identify biofilm for infinity edges, for patient education, and now also for crack identification and documentation. So this material does all three for us. So let's go ahead and put the disclosing solution in. And you're going to go ahead and do this same way each time. You want to go ahead and get the tooth very dry. Don't blast the tooth yet because it's going to remove biofilm. Then go ahead and stain it so you can do documentation. Then you blast. So we're going to go ahead and paint the disclosing solution on. Don't blast yet, just rinse and dry, and then you can document the cracks. So this is nature's mistake. Look at this. Nature put a groove all the way through the tooth. This is bad engineering. Sometimes nature makes a mistake. Now look over here. See how the crack or the groove in the tooth is short, doesn't cross the marginal ridge? That's fine. That's fine. This is not fine. So patient bit down and bingo. There we go. The entire area broke off. Now, how do we restore this? In the old days, I would do a crown. You know, nobody's going to die from missing a distal palatal cusp. In fact, on the other side of her mouth, she had fractured that cusp off 20 years before and had done nothing, and the tooth was fine. It just was a little rough. So she did not want a crown. I didn't want to do a crown. So we did a replacement with a compression joint, which is going to be tough to do in this case. So there's the fractured tooth structure. We know that putting a composite here is going to be, I'm going to do a hand puppet again. Everybody ready for the hand puppet? Okay, I got to show you the hand puppet. Once again, this is a tension joint, and if I replace it with another tension joint, it's just going to snap off. We've got to create a compression joint here. So I'll show you the radius bevel. People ask a lot about the radius bevel. I want to show you the radius bevel. So as we go in here, I'm going to create the radius bevel after we disclose and blast, remove biofilm. So there we are blasting, and there's the case assembled, and I want to show you the radius bevel. Now, from an occlusal view, it looks a little bit flat, but this is a radius bevel. It's arcing. So we have a gradual transition from the thick part of the composite to the thin, and then we're going to allow a little additive dentistry and flow the material here. And so because we've created a nice compression joint, this was a 4-year-old case. It's doing great today because it's a compression joint. There is tension here, but on the primary strike point, when she first hits on this tooth, it's in compression. So that's the radius bevel to remove some of the tension and create a compression joint at the primary start point. There's the case all assembled with a lateral view. There's the etch. We're going to etch to the edge of the matrix, rinse and dry. One of the nice things about this system is I can see from the inside and out. You can see that the matrix is well adapted down here. Bulk filling is only really possible with a translucent matrix. So once again, the whole theme of the lecture is moving to bulk fills. There's another great reason to use bulk fill. With the metal matrix, there's no way you're going to get the light in here. All right, so we did 3-point curing with the BioClear matrix. It's higher risk, so we need to round the anatomy. We're not going to try and put a cusp back here. We're just going to create a rounded anatomy here. Patient's already high risk. You notice that with the diamond wedge, it hasn't collapsed into the preparation, which is great. We're going to have a nice contour here. Obviously, vision through the matrix is helpful. Now, sometimes you'll need to trim back your twin ring on some of these great big cases. You just trim the shoulders up top. And so here we are with injection molding, 3-point curing. There's the contour. Now it's a little bit exotic. I'm not going to cantilever and build a huge cusp here because it's just going to break off. So we're just creating a nice rounding here to eliminate food impaction. This is definitely a compromise. This is what we like to call a patient-centered outcome. I could certainly grind this tooth down to a little stump, take away 80% of the tooth and do a crown. I'm not going to do that. Why would I sacrifice all this tooth structure to replace this missing tooth structure here? And so she is at 4 years and she's doing great. She's not having food impaction. I have a reasonable contact here. As long as the shoulders of the contacts line up, she should not have food impaction from the occlusal. Soft tissue will fill in. There's the tooth restoration interface. Looks great under the microscope. And the infinity edge. So we've been through all the steps of deep margin acquisition. And so we want to go ahead and wrap up. I hope you had a good time. These are the things that we want to make sure that we do. We need to modify our cavity designs to create compression joints and infinity edge margins. If we use the Go No Grow probe or something like that, we're able to make sure that we're not going deeper than 5 millimeters on the interproximal, no deeper than 4 millimeters on the occlusal. We always want to make sure that we follow the manufacturer's recommendations for composites. Sometimes a manufacturer will tell you that their light cures in 5 seconds, and the same manufacturer will tell you that you need 20 seconds to cure their composite. It's the same manufacturer. So you need to follow the directions of the composite, not necessarily the people making the light. If we use an anatomically appropriate matrix that's basically a tooth form, we're able to do buccolingual curing that's a lot more safe, more effective. We're using the BioFit matrix in this particular case. We want to make sure and check your curing light. So you either need to check it yourself, or like I said, 3M has a great system where the reps come in and check your curing lights. They come in and check mine. And the last thing we want to do is once all those things are assembled in place, we can have the confidence to move to modern materials with modern bulk fills. And there's other good bulk fills out there. So now I'm able to have, I make cake and eat it too. I can go ahead and have the aesthetics of an anterior composite, but with all the benefits of deep depth of cure, a little bit less polymerization shrinkage stress, and the confidence that I can create a monolithic restoration in the posterior when I used to have to layer. Whenever we layer, things get more complicated. We have more voids. We have more gaps. It's not as strong. We do monolithic materials for zirconia, for our ceramics. We want monolithic composites. And so this is allowing us to move to something that we trust in zirconia and trust in ceramics. We can have that same trust in our posterior composites. So I hope you've had a great time. You can reach me at drclark@bioclearmatrix.com. And like I said, there are videos there and other videos available on the 3M website, the Viva Learning or the Healthcare Academy through 3M. I think I have 7 or 8 videos. So I look forward to your comments, and we'll see you at the next opportunity.